The name of the podcast is The Big Questions. And the
Yes.
first question that I ask all of my guests is, in my opinion, the biggest and the most interesting question of all. And it's the question that I will ask you now. Who are you?
Wow. That is a big question. This is a tricky one because, when people say, who are you, or what do you do, or whatever, often people jump to, what do I do with my, what do I do for a living, or what do I do for, a vocation. And I sort of tend to think more along the lines of like how I move through the day, how I move through the space. So, well, I would say I'm a person who's seeking um, a higher version of myself at all times, and
Mm,
through that being sort of my goal every day when I wake up, because I don't always wake up in a happy spot, ready to face the challenges of the day. Um, as I kind of carry that idea or that purpose with me through the day, I try to apply it to all the other things that I'm doing, which also kind of contribute to who I am. So I'm a solo mom of two. As soon as I hit the ground running, I'm widowed. So it's the responsibility is mine. And I have a 13-year-old son who lives with cerebral palsy and a 9-year-old spirited little girl as well, Miller and Summer. So I'm definitely a mom. That's part of who I am. But I also think that experience contributes massively to my quest to constantly be stepping into a higher self, a higher version of myself.
for your
Um,
children's sake.
yeah, for their sake, and for, also for my sake, because I did have a complicated childhood and have complicated relationships with my family. And I'm really looking to have a different narrative in our home, as far as like how the kids and I relate to each other. And when their dad died unexpectedly in 2020, it really opened a door for us to frame what a family looks like quite differently. And so I try to keep that vision of becoming a higher version of myself um, at the sort of apex of the way that we interact with each other through the day.
Right.
So that's a really big part of who I am, because it's definitely a mission and a goal of mine to parent differently than I would have actually,
Mm.
if my husband had lived.
And
Um,
why do you think that is? What would have been different in your parenting style had your husband been
yeah,
around?
I feel like when there was two of us and two of them, that we had this situation where I had him there, and him and I could discuss things and set goals and everything, and we were a little bit separate from them.
I see.
Maybe because of the way we were raised, with parents who were sort of presented a united front, and this is the way things will go. And obviously social and emotional development is a much bigger part of everyone's experience now than it was when we were kids. So that was already in place and great. And I certainly don't wish this would have happened. But when we shifted from 4 to 3,
Mhm.
we kind of
Mm.
had to I feel like I had to share more of my own experience as an adult with them, in an effort to allow them to understand what I was moving through and how I was moving through the experience of grief, which was a very unfamiliar territory.
Mhm.
Um, and so we became this little kind of like triangle, and without wanting to extract too much support from my kids, I didn't have that other person there to sort of bounce ideas off of. So the kids became more of a discussion, part of the discussion around everything that we did, from
Right.
our decision to welcome a dog into our family, to move to a new city, to where we were going to travel, what we were going to do. All of those things became part of their narrative too, instead of parents just sort of
Mm.
steering.
Figuring it out and like
Yeah,
delivering the news to them, like this is what we're doing, kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. And
Fascinating.
so, yeah, so they've become my partners in shaping this life, right? And sometimes that's tricky, because sometimes it's too much. It's stuff that I wish I didn't have to share with them, but I do because I want them to always understand where my decisions are coming from. And again, always with the higher version of self, right? Because I feel like that's the best way we can model for our kids. As a parent, I want to model, you know, a striving for personal development, striving for healing, you know, and that is a big part of who I am as well.
So you're someone who's seeking her higher self at all times. You're a mother, a solo mother of two. You're a widower. These are things that I have gleaned from your answers thus far. Tell me
Mhm.
more, Tara.
Mm. I would say the next thing that comes to mind is that I am a person who wants to move through the world in a way that's creative, with a focus on using my creativity to um, connect with other people. But a big part of our story about losing my husband and before that was that I have always found that I connected easily with people when I shared stories of adversity.
Mm.
So my husband and I went through a lot of fertility challenges in an effort to create our family. And I found that sharing that with other people was really, really helpful. I made a short film about our IVF journey. And I just made it for ourselves. And so my child could see, like, you know, that not all
The work
children are created
involved.
the same way.
Yeah, the process that led to their inception. Yeah.
Yeah, and ended up sharing it with some friends who are fertility, traditional Chinese medicine fertility doctors, and they started using it in their practices, helping people understand that this whole scary experience of IVF um, doesn't always tear families apart. You know, it doesn't always have to have this narrative of being so scary and hard. Because our movie was pretty fun and funny, and we had good success as well. So in that we got a child out of it. So I love to like talk about things with people because I feel like that connection just makes people feel less alone and less um, afraid of things. Our first son was also born with a brain injury, which we have no idea why, but he was. And so he lives with cerebral palsy. And so another thing that I've always wanted to do around that was speak out and support families. So we've spoken on a lot of panels, helping families decide like about early intervention and, you know, all of the different things that we have experienced as parents of a child with special needs. And I always found it to feel so sort of freeing to my heart to like talk about these things with people, and it allowed sort of them to talk about their own things as well, their own challenges and their own fears around things. And then of course when my husband died tragically and unexpectedly in 2020, I very much felt that I was being called to do the same thing. So I did need to get quiet for a little bit, and I wasn't sure how that was going to unfold because obviously I hadn't experienced anything like it before. But when it did, once again, I chose creativity as a way to, I guess, step towards healing and also maybe help people step towards theirs. And that's really where the start of creating this book that I've just released and everything, that's really where it all comes from, is from my desire to connect, to um, to find healing in all of
Mm.
these things, in all of those challenges.
Wow, that's
Not
incredible.
just to help other people, but in a very self-serving way. I really
To help
find
yourself.
that the process is very healing for me. Um,
Absolutely. It's
yeah, like
cathartic.
it is. It's really cathartic, and what I find is that, you know, in general, we're more the same than we are different.
Ain't that the truth,
And
sister?
yeah. And so a lot of the things that we've gone through in our family, and some of these things that I've listed that I've talked about publicly before, um, have maybe somebody hasn't been through the exact same situation. Certainly my story of loss and losing my husband is, horror movie worthy. Like nobody has that same story. But I noticed right away that there was all these different types of loss, and the emotions were the same, right? Like the nervous system feels the same when you
Mm.
stub your toe as when you break your arm. You go into fight flight. We have these experiences of emotion. And so again, it just brought me right back to the idea of connecting with people and trying to heal that way. I don't do well in isolation. I don't want to be alone. I don't think most people want to be alone.
We're not meant to be alone.
No.
That's not how we're built. We
Hmm.
need connection. And it's beautiful that you're using creativity to transform adversity and tragedy into healing and connection. I mean, whew, I'm glad to know you. You're doing God's work, baby.
Yeah, it feels like it. I
Oh,
would
yeah.
I would say that I am a connector of people too, just in general. I've also always been a host, a planner, someone who wanted to get in there and, oh, think about this person and oh yeah, they're like looking for this. And I know somebody who, I am just
Yeah.
like a connector and an activator as well. So yeah, I just like have sort of had to surrender into these things and recognize them as ways to heal, and also ways to maybe offer something to other people, like as a gift. Um, and I'm by no means, the most talented writer or anything, but I am willing to do it. I'm willing to tell my story in an
Yeah.
effort to connect.
Yeah,
For
you're a storyteller. With
Mhm.
that's undeniable. Now, how you tell your story and the sort of quality of your trade is irrelevant. I mean, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, you can tell your story. You're telling your story right now very eloquently and beautifully, and you can do it with written words, and you can do it with any number of medium. So, yeah, as I'm sure you're aware, 95% of writing is editing. So, no one pumps out the masterpiece on their first draft, or very few people do, at least in my experience. The real work of writing is in sweating over the finished product for, oh my God, however long it takes. Too long sometimes.
I released the book a month ago and I picked it up. I made the mistake of picking it up a week after. And when you're creating something, you could edit it forever, right? Like you could just go on and on and on. So I picked it up and I was like, oh, this is junk. Like
Yeah,
I
you're a
was like
writer.
way too still, I was way too still in it. Like and so I said to myself, I'm just going to step away from it and I'm just going to let it do its thing out there, and I will go with the feedback that I receive from other people around it now, because at a certain point you have to let these things go, right? And I was ready.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
the Tao Te Ching Lao Tzu says, when the work is done, step away.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's done. Just
Yeah.
walk away now.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
over.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you can keep fiddling with it forever and ever.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
the finish point for me, when I knew, because I could have kept going forever. The finishing point for me was just I felt like I was ready to let the story continue to inform my life, but no longer define my life.
Hmm.
And when I
Yeah.
was ready to let that go, then it was like, okay, there you go. That's going to be what it's going to be, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Surrender it to the universe. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, good for you. Okay, so lots to talk about, a million different avenues here, but obviously the elephant in the room, the thing that I want to ask you about is about your husband and the basis for this book that you've written, obviously. You mentioned it a few times, and so yeah, without giving too much away, because obviously, well, I'm going to read the book regardless, but maybe some people you don't want spoilers, so maybe give some spoiler alerts ahead of this. But yeah, what
Mhm.
can you tell me about that, the events that led to that, and what that event was, and yeah, where you've gone from there?
Yeah. So really, the introduction of the book will spoil it for you anyways, because we all know that he doesn't live.
Right.
What transpired for us was just after the pandemic had happened. My husband was a filmmaker working in Vancouver, producing films. So he was the producer who was very in an active action. So he wasn't just funding the film or anything. He was actually sort of the project manager of
Got
of a
it.
film. And after the pandemic, and we had been shut down for the world had been shut down for several months and it started to open again. His was one of the first projects to get greenlit for Vancouver filming. And so he had to figure out how to do that with, you know, a cast and crew of probably well over 200 people. You know, it's a whole different job, right? So, you know, trying to get people into, you know, spaces where they're still socially distanced, feeding that many people multiple meals a day safely, like there was a lot of chaos, and everyone kind of was jumping back into the world, and you know, that's what everybody was ready to do. So that was cool. So he started filming, and of course within about a month and a half they began shooting, and right away somebody got COVID, right? So then everyone had to get tested, and then he had it, and he had no symptoms or anything. And to be honest, him and I weren't afraid of the virus or anything like that. But everybody, it was still new to everybody, and we were kind of following rules. And so what ended up happening was, right after the kids had gone back to school in September, this went down. We were mandated to be in our home on separate levels of the house. So he was living upstairs in our kind of bedroom area where there was a bathroom. And then the kids and I, who were tested negative, were on the main floor, but the kids were not able to go back to school. And so I had to put all my projects on hold and everything. And we just kind of like moving in different spaces for the course of a week. And, you know, him at the top of the stairs, me at the bottom of the stairs, having our chats every night. And we were having wonderful conversations about what was worth doing, because he was trying to get this film back on its feet, and like kind of spinning his wheels a bit, because really, how are you going to do it, right? I mean, when an actor can't ride with another actor in the same car to get, you know, it's just every detail was his responsibility. And that's cool. He wasn't a person who got stressed out about work, but we were discussing what was worth doing, because he didn't really need to do the project. So he was clearly in need of a change of scenery, and I encouraged him on one Thursday night. I just remember it was a Thursday, or maybe it was a Wednesday. It's actually quite joyful that I forget. I encouraged him to get out of the house the next day. I was just kind of like, you're not going to infect anyone. Go for a walk, whatever. And he was a guy who really needed like a purpose to take time for himself. He wasn't really good at just taking time for himself. There needed to be a reason. And in this case, he was feeling pretty guilty about us being locked down as well, because we'd just come out of it. But I was just encouraging him to get out. So anyways, early in the morning, he decided to head out. He didn't know quite where he was going to go. He thought he might go get gas in the car and pop over to his office and just like make sure everything was cool over there. And I said, take your time. Like, you're not going to hurt anybody. You know, he had no symptoms. He's just fine. And so I made him a fresh cup of coffee, and we air kissed across the kitchen, and he headed out. And throughout the morning, we texted each other, but we were talking about our conversation that we've been having about like, what's worth doing? Like, do you actually need to be doing this job? I'm building a business that I'm excited about. You're not super excited about, you know, we were having a pivotal moment in our family, really beautiful conversations. But what we didn't talk about was where he was. And throughout the course of the day, I had texted him a few times and called a few times, and his call, he hadn't responded, and his phone had gone straight to voicemail, which wasn't for a seasoned film wife, not alarming at all,
Right.
because he can easily be in meetings all day, especially under these circumstances. And so I didn't really think about it. And I had a call that day with a group of women where we were doing a cord cutting ceremony, an energetic cord cutting ceremony, which was very new to me. I had no idea what that was. And in it was like a guided meditation where we were kind of cutting energetic cords with people. And I wasn't specifically, you know, cutting my energetic cords to him, but I had a very emotional, transcendent experience during that. And I was I released a lot of tears, and I didn't understand any of it. But it is a beautiful part of the story where I start to introduce how I started to connect my experience of spirit with what was happening in my 3D life. Around, I came out of that and I was fine and I didn't connect it to him or anything. And at around 4 o'clock, again, I wouldn't have been nervous normally, but for some reason, I could feel it in my body that something was wrong.
Hmm.
And I made a couple of calls. I called his assistant, who also was quarantining in a hotel and working from there. And he confirmed that he hadn't heard from Darcy all day, not since the morning. And right away, I called the hospitals and there was nothing. And I called some of the hotels that, some of his crew was working in. I thought he might have gone there and just been on long calls, and nobody had heard from him. And so I knew innately that I had to call the police. And right away, they set up a missing persons situation. And what I can tell you is that it took them 9 days to find his car. And so it was 9 long days before a search could even start.
Oh man.
Because otherwise, you're just looking for a needle in a haystack, right?
Right.
So they can't use resources. Obviously, the police were asking me a lot of questions, and I experienced, I had to sort of look at every potential possibility. It was
Yeah.
a really crazy time. I was kind of hiding in my closet. I wasn't sure what to tell the kids because I didn't have anything to tell them. And so I had my sister and my cousin come into town to sort of hang out with the kids, and I took all these calls from the police. And during that time, I had to really answer a lot of questions that were really hard. So, every scenario needed to be explored. So they wanted to know, like, was he mentally unstable? No. Was he, addicted to drugs or alcohol? No. Was he, just so stressed that he just needed to get away from, and I mean, that was just ridiculous to me. This was a guy who lived for us, lived for his kids. He just 100% found his peace and calm with us, not away from us. Like, it never would have happened. But of course, you have to go through all of these questions, and friends and well-meaning people were calling us up with ideas about what might have happened and everything.
Can I
And
ask a quick question? But I don't want to interrupt your story. Obviously, this is riveting stuff, but at this stage, were you said things like he found his peace with us. He didn't get stressed from work. Did you start second guessing what you thought you knew about him during this 9 day period, or were you rock solid the whole time? That's like, no, this is impossible. Did you start to actually consider some of these possibilities?
I mean, I mean, you really have to, and this is a great question because it leads me to sort of a pivotal piece as far as my the spiritual goodness that has come from this experience. No, I did have to, because all of a sudden this most unthinkable thing has happened. He never didn't come home. This was a guy who didn't ever go to happy hour with anyone after work. Like, he wanted to get home.
Yeah.
And so it was really unthinkable. So the the thing about that is, when the most unthinkable, most impossible thing is happening, you have to look at all potential possibilities, which is terrifying in that moment, because it's like, yeah, maybe he does have a whole other family living
Right.
in Belize and I don't know, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, but the beautiful part of that for me arrived on about the third or fourth day. A girlfriend texted me from Ontario and I was in BC, and she said, I find it absolutely impossible to think that Darcy will not find his way to safety wherever he is. And she used the word impossible. And I was like, yes, the most impossible thing is happening right now. It's absolutely impossible. All of those scenarios that I've been entertaining for the first 3 or 4 days, I know now are impossible. So if the impossible is happening in the worst way, I also have to recognize that impossible in the best way can also happen.
It's all possible.
in that moment, it didn't land as nicely as I would like it to land because I was obviously in shock and fight flight and focused on the negative side of it. But what a gift to understand that anything is possible. Because now, as I've moved through and away from this devastating scenario, I let that inform how I move forward, right? Because, yeah, the impossible, most terrifying thing ever happened in my life. But a lot of the most impossible things that we dream of and we call impossible are also possible for us now because we've seen the flip side of it. And so that was a really big kind of understanding that came on around the fourth day, maybe. I Like I said, it wasn't like that seed was planted, but it didn't grow in the best way. So I was still in doubt and fear. But on the ninth day of his disappearance, a mountain biker found his car, and it was parked. We lived in Vancouver, and there's a beautiful drive that goes up the west coast. For those of you who don't know the terrain, we head up really easily to the mountains, to Whistler Mountain and Squamish, which is like deep, deep woods of British Columbia. And that was his old stomping grounds. He used to make commercials and things up there, and he, knew all the back roads. And so I kind of realized when they found his car where it was, it seemed like so remote and a little bit suspicious. But to me, it wasn't. It was like, yes, that's exactly where he would go. He would have taken a beautiful drive along the coast, listened to some music in the car, had his nice coffee that I made him. He didn't take a coat. He didn't take things for hiking or anything like that. But what I do know is I know his constitution really well. And by the time he made that 45 or an hour drive up to the Squamish area where his car was found, he definitely would have had to go to the bathroom. I can tell you that. And he wouldn't have gone into a coffee shop or anything like that because he was, COVID positive, and everybody was very fearful about that. And so he would have taken one of those back roads and just gone up and found a place. His mind was really full, and so if he took a walk to clear his head, which I had encouraged him to do, the weather had been ferociously, like, torrential downpour for days leading up to it. Roads were washed out up there. The deep woods of British Columbia are pretty treacherous, and the earth was crumbling. And there was the Mamquam River runs through there, and it's ferocious. And so whatever happened up there, to be there for 9 days, it would have been very hard to come out of whatever happened. What I will say is that the search and rescue began at that point, and a lot of friends and family joined in as well. And my cousin, who is a first responder, came from Alberta to help with that. And after they'd sort of exhausted the search through this dense forest area, they have a formula, and they have to at some point call the search off. And so I did then call on my cousin to sort of give me some probability, because I could have sat frozen on my couch for the rest of my life waiting for somebody else to tell me it's time to move. I could have waited there forever, like a hostage, right? Just waiting for something outside myself to tell me that he was gone. And so at a certain point, I had to decide what I was going to do and how I was going to move forward. So I called on my cousin, who was able to give me some probability, stats around if someone had been in the woods for that long, what state they would be in, if he had been injured or whatever. And it was fair to say that, we could presume that he had died. And so then I had to tell my kids, which is difficult because you don't have answers. And I share that story in the book. And from there, I feel like we managed to steer our ship towards healing. And I feel like right away we knew that our story was going to be something that we could turn into, if we wanted to find meaning in it and accept that these things happen in our lives for us, not to us, that we might be able to just choose our own narrative with it. And so that's what we've done.
Wow.
And so that's essentially all covered in the introduction to the book. And everything that unfolded after that was also, pivotal. I started to recognize, first, there was a real lack of, I started looking for books to read, right? I'd never done this before.
Mm-hmm.
I
Books
had
to read on grief or on
Yeah,
death, or okay.
yeah. So books to read on grief, because I had lost my uncle and my stepdad both to cancers after long battles where there was already some peace that had arrived when they left. This was a situation where not only do we not have closure, right?
Yeah.
Like closure.
Yeah.
I've never done this before, and I'm going to take these kids through this experience. So I started looking for books to help me with that. And there was a general narrative, Oliver, of grief is going to be with you forever. Grief is going to be so heavy. Your life is so different now. The joy is gone. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be there. And I was willing to accept that grief was always going to be there, but I wasn't willing to suffer. And so,
important distinction, by the way, right?
It is, right? And I started to think about it. And so I stopped looking for books and I started reading books about people who are creative in adverse times. I read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, which I had read before, which is just inspiration after inspiration about creativity and how it has the power to heal us. And I read another really cool book about our beloved Tragically Hip and the choices that they made to get extra creative when Gord Downie was diagnosed. And so I started reading books like that because I felt like they were more uplifting to me and that they served my energy better. And very quickly also started to draw parallels between, things like diagnosis. I had a friend going through a divorce at that time, and she kept saying to me, "Oh, I don't want to compare it to your, to this for you. I don't want to compare it." But I said, "But look, we're feeling the same things." I was like, diagnosis is loss. Divorce is loss. Death is loss. I realized that sameness again, right? And I started thinking, there's a lot of things about us that, there's a lot of people that have a really hard time talking about death because in our culture we don't.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of people that were pretty uncomfortable, right, with me. With coming near us and trying to hold space for us. They just didn't feel confident. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, my story is a little on the sensational side, for lack of a better way of putting it. But we all understand these feelings. So we are all innately capable of helping each other. Right?
Yeah.
And so and the biggest realization I had was that the whole world had just gone through a massive experience of loss.
Yeah.
One day we could go to the movies, the next day we couldn't. One day I could meet you for a coffee, the next day I couldn't. One day things were one way, the next day things were a different way, and that is loss.
Yeah, we were all grieving in some form. Absolutely. That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, another good point that you make that I completely agree with is that there is no hierarchy of suffering. And what your friend was doing was kind of playing that game of your loss is worse than my loss. And I can't feel bad because you're going through something much worse. And I think it was a lady by the name of Edith Eger who wrote a book. She was a Holocaust survivor. and she's the one who really made this explicit for me. She said, patients would feel bad because she became a therapist, and patients would sometimes learn her story, and then it would come in the way of their work together, because it was like, well, what I'm going through is nothing compared to what you went through, and look at you, you're happy and purpose driven, and your life has meaning, and all these things. And she would tell them, no, suffering is suffering. There's no hierarchy. And
Indeed.
your story and your realizations perfectly enforce that truth. So, yeah, very, very astute of you to pick these things up, which brings me to my next question. People go through these types of experiences. It's not a common experience, obviously. What happened in your case was fairly exceptional, but people go through tragic loss all the time. And most people who go through this, I think, come out of it with the experience and the beliefs that were expressed in those first few books that you picked up. They
Mhm.
don't ever find a way to move through it, integrate it, look at it in a certain way, take control of that narrative around it, all the things that you've kind of described yourself as doing over the course of these events. Most people don't get to that. And so what I would like to ask you is, why you?
Mhm.
What are some of the other experiences in your life? And I'm guessing that they're there because nobody really goes through things like this. Another example that I religiously rely on is Viktor Frankl, and I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, another Holocaust survivor. And he says, if you have a why to live for, you can endure any what. You can go through pain, you can go through torture. And so people like this exist. You're an example. But what I'm curious about is, how do people like you come to be? So I don't know if you have any insights into some of the more formative experiences in your life that maybe made you the kind of person who can absorb loss and transform it into something beautiful, healing, and connecting.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing question. And I think there's a lot to it. I honestly think that um, my first of all, I think something that holds people back from approaching things from this kind of um, something that
Perspective.
holds yeah, like something that holds people back through viewing adversity through the lens of love is that our conditioning is such that we look at these sensational experiences and we think that they are there to define us. And I think that, like, with a lot of people who go through intense loss or whatever, and especially in our case where there's such a big focus on, quote unquote closure. Now, I don't dismiss that need for people one bit, but I also know that we don't a lot of things don't bring closure with them. My friend who was going through a breast cancer diagnosis at that time doesn't know why cancer chose her.
Hmm.
She's never going to know that. So she has to manage that as well.
Right.
Um, or like, we don't know where things went wrong in the tunnel of marriage and raising kids that somehow helped people grow apart. So I don't think closure necessarily needs to be a thing.
Yeah, enclosure, the way that you're describing it to me sounds like knowing all the particulars in that situation, which I
Yeah.
think is impossible. I don't think, if that's how we define closure, then I would say good luck achieving that.
Indeed. And I think uncertainty, like what I learned from the experience, was that uncertainty is just inevitable. And I have to say, and this is maybe not a great answer to this big, beautiful question, but there's part of me that's just my disposition that I don't want to be a victim.
Nice.
So when my beautiful first son Miller was born with a brain injury, and we sat with a neurologist after the MRI on the fourth day of life, and I had never even held him yet, and the neurologist basically said, we don't know how he will develop as he gets older. I They didn't have answers for us, and so I had to learn to land into that experience. And my husband was so amazing in that experience. I said to him, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to move forward? We don't know what to expect. Like, it might not affect him at all. We might be building ramps up to our house at some point. Like, and he just said to me, Tara, life is uncertain. If we weren't worried about how he was going to develop with this brain injury, we'd be worried about him getting hit by a bus or becoming a crystal meth addict at 14 or all of the things. Like, we are living this human existence and we need to accept that we don't know. And so
Darcy was a wise man, by the way.
he really was.
Sure,
And
you know that.
very, very calm and about it, you know, and I did learn that from him because I had tended to be a real worrier previously in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess practice, right, is part of the answer to the question.
Yeah.
Why me? Because I had some practice with it, which brings you to a level of acceptance that you don't always know. And in my experience, and certainly the way that the book is framed, acceptance is a pivotal piece in moving forward with maybe a more optimistic kind of view about things.
Mm.
And then I would add that I had some experiences when Darcy first disappeared and in the early days of my acceptance of his death, where I had an undeniable connection with God,
Mm-hmm.
with the God of my understanding, who I didn't understand before this. I really didn't. I knew I had an interest in a higher power. I knew that there was something bigger than me. Darcy and I had, you know, always been looking for something that felt spiritual, some sort of spiritual path. We would like read books about things, and both of us had parents who were born again Christians, but we hadn't really landed into anything. And I did have a couple of pivotal moments, which I do talk about in the book, where I had deep connection with spirit. On most pivotal would be, and most relevant to this question, would be on the third day that he was gone. I sat on my back porch, a completely unseasoned meditator with no idea that we are all capable of consciously channeling, you know, from the divine. I just sat back there desperate for an answer. And I remember the sun shining on me and just thinking, well, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to ask for an answer.
Mm.
And I sat in that intense desire to know what was happening, especially because I'd been answering all those questions of, like, you know, all of those things where I felt like I didn't know him anymore. I wanted to know what happened so that I could know that the person that I knew him to be was him. And I sat and I was given a vision of what happened. And at this point, I didn't even know he was in those deep woods. I had no idea where he was, but that's where he was in my vision.
Mm.
And in the vision, he's walking very close to a tree, and it's a very close-up shot in my mind. And he's walking, he's fine, he gets near this tree, and that was my vision. And the way that I can describe it is like, that's a very horrifying scene. What was shown to me was that he had fallen fast. And also, it was the most peaceful feeling I had ever had in my life. And I have spoken with many people who are really gifted channels since then, really gifted conscious channels and mediums and that. And I said, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how I called in that vision. And they said, like, when you want to know something that badly and you're open to whatever the answer is, you're going to get the truth. And the truth is always going to feel good.
Mm.
Because how could you have that vision but feel as peaceful as I felt? And it lasted for, you know, a very short period of time, but I know what it felt like. And I remember a friend telling me, just journal about that right now. Hold on to that feeling. And, you know, that's my closure.
Wow.
Yeah. I knew the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. You ask and you shall receive, and the truth shall set you free. So it's It goes in hand, it seems.
Yeah, and
Wow.
so that's part of the answer to the question is it was God given, Oliver. Like I can't describe that and I can't tell anyone else how to harness that, but I do in the book share then all of the things that I was able to consciously like practice um once I landed into that acceptance. But that experience of spirit or source or whatever you want to call it
Mhm.
was what allowed me to sit in acceptance before we even knew where his car was.
Wow. Yeah, incredible. And the cool thing is that these experiences often happen to people who have no background knowledge of what mysticism is and what mystical awareness and the mystical experience. None of these things are on your radar. And then you have the experience, and then most people try to make sense of the experience. And in their research and in their exploration, subsequently, they discover that this is actually well trodden ground, that human beings have been having these experiences and these realizations for centuries and centuries and centuries. And it's actually accessible to everyone
Yeah.
here now. I mean, that's the greatest piece of good news that I have ever heard. and and for these things to happen to people during these dark periods in their lives as well, there's something there. You said it, practice and acceptance. I think those are two very good takeaways. I'm always looking for the ingredients, the
Yeah.
secret sauce. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
what are the ingredients, right? Because I mean, I think I know through my own experiences, but this is like gathering pieces of the puzzle, right? And there's always new insights and new perspectives that emerge from other people's mystical experiences and realizations. So I love asking, and thank you very much for sharing. Not only, your ingredients in the secret sauce, but this story, which is extremely powerful.
Mm. One more little piece of that that I think could be potentially more like helpful because this is something we can choose. That was to be curious.
Hmm.
So I'm sitting there in this experience where the one thing that I want most in my life is not there.
Yeah.
And everywhere else I look, I have exactly what I need. And
Mm.
by that I mean a perfect stranger called me 12 times a day to practice EFT tapping, which is my healing modality of choice. And it was new to me then, but she called me 12 times a day, 15 times a day while I was frozen on that couch to tap with me and help me process and stay grounded enough to answer those calls from police, to explore the ideas. That was just like miraculous to me. Then when it came time to talk to my kids about what was happening, I, believe it or not, am connected to one of the world's leading trauma therapists, Gabor Mate, Dr.
Mm.
Mate, who many people know. I happened to be connected with him close enough so that he was able to actually guide me through that experience in an effort to minimize the trauma that my kids would hold on to from the experience of learning that their dad had disappeared and died, presumably died. Um, Things like my financial advisor from our bank, because when somebody dies, you don't have access to anything that's not in your name.
Yep.
Uh, for some reason, he happened to be a person who just lived up the street and had, the ability to help me just like come to his house, like in my flip flops and just deal with the financial stuff as all of that kind of, everywhere I looked, I had people coming to me. A mild acquaintance called me in the moment that I was feeling such rage and happens to be a Kundalini guru who could help me with postures that could clear the anger and the energy and the intensity. So all of these things were being offered up to me at the hardest time. How is it that I had everything else that I needed? I started to get curious about that and the polarity of that. And the general feeling that came up in me was that this was happening for me for a reason.
Mm. Yeah, and that's the difference between a victim mindset and a beneficiary mindset,
Right.
right? Somebody who's just won the lottery versus someone who's just been wronged somehow, right?
Totally. Totally.
Yeah, but you have to be open, is what you're saying, or yeah, open to the possibility at least that maybe this is actually happening for you and not to you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
I,
think it's creativity and imagination too in some cases, because sometimes your situation being a prime example, it's not obvious why something like that would happen for you as opposed to you. It's much more natural and easy to assume that it's happening to you. So yeah, there's a couple of ingredients mixed in there. I like that.
Mhm. And then like a lot of people, the other thing that really helps you through that and want to do the best that you can do in these circumstances is your children, right? Like I was motivated to not have them feel like victims. And on the maybe it was 2 weeks after the kids had learned this news, I was holding my son and he was having a real deep moment of grief and he was crying and he whispered in my ear, "Mom, when we heal from this, we're going to help so many people."
Mm,
And I was like, if he can come up with that on his own, that is a motivation for me to point us in that direction and choose the lens of love instead of the lens of fear, which is for me versus to me, right?
hmm.
And if they've got that in them already, that's reason to try to look for the light.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, beautiful. From the mouth of babes, right? They're open. They're way more open than we are. They haven't spent years building up fortifications against it,
Yeah,
blocking the way, right? And just
yeah,
speaks through
yeah.
them.
Just
Beautiful. Wow.
incredible. Just
Well,
incredible.
I agree with your son. You are doing that. There is no doubt about it. This story is powerful. And I mean, I'm sure it has already healed many people and it will heal many more. And I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, it's really cool to see how it's unfolding for people. A lot of people have picked up the book because they have lost someone,
Mhm.
and so they've picked up the book and then they've reached out and said things like, "Wow, I'm realizing that I actually need to grieve the loss of myself to motherhood. I need to
Ah,
grieve a version of myself that has changed as I've, headed into, or grieving like a career that I mean,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
so
yeah.
many layers to it,
Yeah.
which is just a beautiful reminder that we are all capable and connected through our different experiences of loss. We're all capable of helping each other.
The great unifier.
Yeah.
Right? Death is
Yeah.
something that we turn away from and we fear and we dread it. But
Mhm.
when you look at it from the right angle, it's actually the thing that unites us all. It's like a thread that runs through each and every single one of us. Doesn't matter how rich you are, doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter who you were born to,
No,
it's going to bring us all together eventually. There's no way around it. So,
no, we don't get to avoid it. And we don't get to avoid like the various experiences of loss, which is another thing that's exciting me about the book since I put it out, is that I realize that it's a book that we don't just need to put on the shelf and put away. It's things are going to come up again where we can grab it and we can flip through a chapter or read one of the snapshots because the book does incorporate some curated collections of blog posts that I wrote early in real time
okay.
when the kids and I were going through it. And so some of that stuff will continue to be very relevant as we move forward. So I'm excited about that because I feel it's going to be a helpful tool for me as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's a universal topic, but basically, so it's never going to be useless. It's always going to have value no matter what, because as you
Mhm.
said, loss is not just the loss of people. You can lose anything.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, wow, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with me, Tara. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
I'm going to put a link to your book, actually to your whole website and to your book in the description of this episode. And like I said at the beginning, you take this video, I'll send you the whole thing uncut. You do whatever you want with it. And I will post it on my channel in the next couple of days.
amazing. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Oliver.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. And yeah, so anything else that you want to say as a parting message to the audience before we sign off?
I guess there is. I guess the thing that I always want people to take away is that with all of the uncertainties and all of the things that we're sort of at the mercy of other people's choices, other people's moves, and other people's decisions and the way of the world, is that it does all boil down to the recognition that we always have a choice.
Hmm.
right? And so there's been so many choice points here. And at every point, the bottom line is, do I choose love or do I choose fear? What lens am I going to look at this particular situation that I'm going through? And like, I often describe this experience of my life as equal parts exceptional and excruciating. And so it's what way do I want to look at it, right? It's equal parts excruciating and extraordinary and exceptional. And so really most of the things that we choose in our life is like, with every sentence we say, with every response to every conversation, we're choosing between love and fear. And I've just found that like love and connection is a really, really quick way to find peace. It's the fastest path to peace. So
Amen. Well, thanks for making the choice. Thanks for
yeah,
choosing love for
yeah,
yourself and for all of us. I really appreciate that.
I
Yeah.
feel really grateful.
Awesome. All
Mhm.
right. Well, I'm gonna sign off and go do family stuff. But
Me
thank you so
too.
much for your time, Tara. I really appreciate it. And maybe we can do it again. I'm sure there's
Yeah,
lots more we can talk about. I wanted to ask you about like different spiritual books and traditions and stuff,
yeah,
but I like getting the story first, and then we
yeah,
can have more episodes if you like, and we can
yeah,
pick
for
a
sure.
topic and focus on that. And yeah, so
For
love
sure.
chatting with you.
Yeah, the big questions. I love it. So
Yeah.
good. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great
Okay.
day.
Okay.
Bye.